Before I start telling this story, I have to say that this happened over 3.5 years when I was between the ages of 15 and 18. All of the people in this story have had their names changed, for privacy reasons. I grew up in a pretty good-sized town. High school grades always had between 800 and about 1,000 students. The town was about 45 minutes to an hour from the second biggest city in the state, which is known for 3 rivers and its many bridges. I have 2 older brothers, which means obviously I am the youngest of 3 boys. Our mother was the general manager at the family's golf course. By no means were we well off in any way, but we were also far from poor. Our father was in the state police, a lieutenant at the time of everything happening. Cop Dad was very hard on us when needed, but we all 3 learned to always be respectful no matter what, unless extreme situations called for otherwise. I will say that due to a very dark history, I've never had a particularly close relationship at all with my brothers or my parents. Even with all of that, though, I'll admit that this experience made my dad and I be slightly closer, even for very short time periods. We only had one thing in common, that we'd each protect the ones we love at all costs, even if it meant our lives. Him with my mom, family, and I with my girlfriend, nieces, and nephew. When I was just 15, I was downtown getting food and ice cream with friends at a place about a half a mile from the high school football stadium. Being that we were only 15 years old, going into our 10th grade year of high school, and just about to turn 16, we all rode our bikes to meet up. When we came back outside to leave to do something else, though, I realized that my bike was missing. As soon as the group and I checked the immediate area, I called my dad, knowing that he was home from work. He flew down to where I was. Home was only about 3 miles away from where I was at after all. We all figured he'd be extremely pissed at us, but luckily he wasn't. All of my friends got on their bikes to go off in different directions towards their own homes, and to go help look for my bike. As my dad and I were driving towards the part of town we lived in, we saw a group of 3 people, 2 males and 1 female, walking down a side street towards the main street we were on, about 1.5 miles from the restaurant. The group was pushing my bike as they walked, causing me to snap to attention and yell loudly, "Hey, they have my bike!" My dad stopped immediately and put the car in park in the street. We jumped out and I laughed inside, due to seeing my dad go from usual to being, well, Cop Dad. He had the girl and 1 guy stand at the wall with their faces touching it. He slammed the guy with the bike to the ground. I grabbed the bike and put it in the bed of my truck. Since it was only 2 of us against 3, my dad told me, "Get in the truck so they don't see your face." I told him, no way. It wasn't until years later that I came to regret that. The cops came and arrested all 3 of them. Fast forward 2.5 years later, I was 18 years old and home from my freshman year of college, which was spent at a military college across the state from home. I was out jogging around 6 p.m. one night on the sidewalk next to the old road when a car flew past me, sat at the stop sign at the top of the hill, and waited until I passed them. The stop sign, I should say, is directly in front of my house. Luckily, I was home right then and memorized the car's details, or as much as I could. I wrote down what I remembered. Green 2003 Toyota Camry that was very beat up. The vehicle drove but went a lot slower. I walked into the house as they were passing. I didn't think anything wrong with the situation, other than someone driving fast and slowing down upon realizing someone was jogging in the road. Fast forward 1 week, though. I just finished up another jog, walked into the house through the front door, which leads right into the kitchen. It has a big window that looks out to the driveway, front yard, the street, and the stop sign the car had stopped at 1 week before. As soon as I walked to the sink by the window to splash some cold water on my face, I suddenly heard a loud boom from outside, sounding like an M80 exploding, then 1 second of silence. 3 loud booms in quick succession, which, thanks to me being a hunter, I immediately recognized as gunfire. I dropped down, crawled to the door, grabbed the baseball bat my brothers and I used before, and ran out the door, even though I knew I had only a bat and 0 chance of winning against a firearm. I was hoping that I'd surprise them somehow, and they'd think I'd gone crazy, or that I had nothing to lose. When I got outside, they were standing in the driveway. I recognized that same vehicle from a week earlier that sat at the stop sign when I was out jogging. Thankfully, no one was home except me at the time, because who knows where they would have been standing. After the police came and I had given my statement, we waited. Since the town was big for a town, it was also small enough that a lot of people knew who others were. The town's police, my brothers, all joked with me, asking things like, "Did you try being a hero when no one was around?" Or would ask if I was crazy due to running outside towards gunfire without a gun. Well, 2 or 3 days had passed when we had received the call from the cops saying they'd caught the man who shot up the house. It turns out it was the exact same guy who'd stolen my bike 2.5 years earlier. After finding that out, my dad and I looked at each other without saying anything. We didn't tell my mom about it being the same guy. The guy received 10 years for attempted murder with a weapon, attempted assault, but due to not a single person being injured in any way, no assault charges of any kind were charged towards him. The man was able to get a gun from his friend who worked at the county courthouse due to stealing it from the judge's office desk. We tried to go on with our lives. I became an EMT during college, working on weekends, then finished school. When I was about 26 years old, I had stopped by my parents' house when I was in the area. I walked into the kitchen, and on the kitchen table was the town's newspaper. It had the front page reading something along the lines of, "Local woman missing, vehicle found abandoned and burned." As I started reading the article for a second, I almost immediately ripped the kitchen table off the frame in rage. The article said that the missing woman's boyfriend for some period of time was the same man who had stolen my bike and shot my parents' house with me in the front window. He wasn't arrested or charged with any crime relating to the missing woman at the time. I left and went back to my apartment an hour away. I made sure I was always carrying a pistol, except when I was working in the ambulance, of course. Even through all of the rage I was feeling, somewhat paranoid thoughts of him still following me crept through my mind, even if it was completely unlikely. My parents left their house for a week to stay at my grandpa's house. Life went on from there. I still work as an EMT in the second biggest city in my state, and enjoy every second I spend with my girlfriend and the ever-growing group of nieces and nephews who call me their goofy bearded funkle. The guy is who knows where, but I'm glad he's not doing anything to harm me, or even worse, my girlfriend, or someone in my small group of people who I love. This story happened to me a few weeks ago. It was early October, and my sister and I were in the kitchen, me doing my homework and my sister making some lunch for our dad for tomorrow. If you're asking why, well, it's not really anyone's business, but my mom is pregnant and she's still in her early stages, and she can't really get up to do a lot of stuff right now. Well, everyone was asleep, and it was about 1 to 12 in the morning. We had decided, since the day was being pretty shit, we would go and roll up. Well, you know what I mean. We had everything ready to go, and trying our best to sneak out through the back door into the backyard as silent as possible. The night was one of those nights the moon's light is bright enough for you to make out things in front of you, kind of clear enough to know what it is. We were by our trampoline, sitting on top of it, which is important, trust me. I was sitting in a chair, and my sister in one of those cars for infants. We were chilling, and I was looking up at the moon. My sister was trying to look at what I was looking at, because she's kind of blind. We started talking about random shit, going on about the world. But then, I suddenly heard some steps from nearby. Not normal animal steps, but heavy footsteps. I don't know, I might sound kinda crazy, but I could hear it just on the other side of the fence. Since the fence was made out of wood, I couldn't see through to what was on the other side. I looked at her, and with my eyes pointed at the direction of the sound was coming from. She just nodded her head to show that she had heard it too. We shook it off. We were high off our asses after all. We just kept on hitting it, until a few moments later, we heard the sound again, but this time, it was getting closer to the fence. I was kind of getting freaked out now. I looked at my sister, and she was just frozen there. I knew it was real now, and the adrenaline made me sober up. I knew if we stayed there, something bad was probably going to happen. Call me crazy, but I had a feeling in my gut, and knew we just had to get the fuck away from there. We couldn't go inside yet, because we had to wait for the hair thing to turn on to make noise, so we just got closer to the house, and waited by the car. Suddenly, the light on the other side of the neighborhood turned on, and I could make out something black walking by. Then, we heard a lady screaming. What the fuck? I was so confused. I looked over at my sister. We could hear the thing moving again, but this time, it was moving towards an abandoned house on the other side of the neighborhood. And that's when my sister and I said, fuck it. We went inside even though that thing wasn't on yet. Once we were inside, we locked the door, and I immediately went up to my room. I was inside my closet, and she was taking her shoes off outside my room. I asked her something, and she had just come in and was about to close the door when there was a bang on our back door. Someone, or something, had been knocking on our door so hard we could feel trembling in our feet. Now I was beyond scared. I immediately jumped into my bed like a 5-year-old kid. I thought my sister was doing the same thing. I grabbed her phone and pointed the light towards her direction, but she was still frozen there. I grabbed her hand so I could pull her into the bed. We were laying there in bed, not knowing who or what was lurking outside our house and why they were trying to get in. I was surprised my parents hadn't heard anything, but also realized they mustn't have, or else they would go and investigate right away. The noise stopped rather suddenly, before we heard our neighbor's dog barking. It was slowly barking towards the backyard fence once again, before stopping altogether a few moments later. Whatever creepy thing or person was lurking in my backyard, let's not meet. At the time, I was 22, and I had just lost my job. In order to pay my bills, I picked up a job working for a friend of mine who needed a process server to serve papers for foreclosures. While I had never done it before, the money was fairly good, and it was something to hold me over until I could find something a bit more permanent. Most of the time, the hardest part of the job was finding the people who I needed to serve the papers when they were home. While I had heard that the job could be quite dangerous, other than an old man threatening that he was going to beat me up, and the occasional dog, I was never really in any dangerous or ominous situations. Typically, it would just be that people would ignore the door, or even deny being who I was looking for. That was the worst I ever had to deal with. I would often only serve papers during the day, because both my girlfriend and my mother would get quite concerned when I would go out at night. There was this one house, though, that after several attempts during the day, I decided I was going to try at night this time. This house was in a wooded area, and had a long dirt driveway up a hill. During the day, it didn't seem really scary at all. It seemed like a nice house, actually. But at night, it was transformed into pitch black and silence, which only made it that much more creepy. As I pulled up to the house, I saw a car parked up at the top of the driveway, which was about 20 feet from the house itself. I could see a few lights on inside. I thought to myself, awesome, someone is finally here. I'll do this real quick and easy and be right on my way. I got out of the car and walked up onto the porch. There were no lights on lighting up the porch, but the lights on inside, so it was completely black. I knocked on the door and rang the bell, and waited for a while, but no one would come to the door. I rang the bell again. Suddenly, a light in the kitchen at the end of the hall that led to the front door went off. Still, no one came. I knocked a little harder, but still no one came to the door. Just about ready to give up, I started to walk back to my car, when suddenly, the porch light turned on. I turned around and went back to the porch, but as soon as I put my foot on the first step, the light went out again. I looked around, thinking someone must be watching me and playing a prank or something, but I couldn't see anyone. I knocked again, but again, no one came to the door. I tried looking through the windows. The house seemed to look like a hoarder lived there, but there was no sign of it actually being lived in. Again, I knocked, rang, and waited, but still, nobody came. I decided I was just about done with this scary situation, and I was just going to leave. I was reaching for my door handle, when again the light on the porch turned on. This time, I looked into the window in the house. I could see half of a person standing near the window and watching me. I walked quickly up to the door, hoping to get there before they could leave and pretend they weren't there. This time, though, the light stayed on as I stepped onto the porch. I walked up to the door, rang the bell, but the person I had seen was now nowhere to be found. Suddenly, to my right, a man appeared from beyond the corner of the house. He scared the crap out of me. I started walking backwards, only to suddenly hear footsteps coming from behind me. A girl walked around from the other corner. "Hi, can I help you?" I told him I had papers to serve the owner. He told me that would be his parents. I asked if he lived there. He was giving me a weird vibe, but he said yes, so I gave him the papers and quickly walked back to my car. When I looked back at the house, both of them were now standing on the porch, staring silently at me. While this was creepy and scared the crap out of me, it wasn't until the next day, when I handed in my affidavit for it, that I found out the owner had died long ago, and nobody was supposed to be living there. They still needed 3 attempts before they could file the paperwork, which is why they had sent me. I didn't serve at night anymore after that, nor did I ever tell my mother or girlfriend. A little background. I'm a visually impaired female college student, and it was the last day of September of 2015 when this event happened. It was way before I started taking Uber to get to school. Being visually impaired, I have to be very aware of my surroundings because I've encountered many situations with people who made me very uncomfortable. Some people had good intentions, I guess, but there were quite a number of people who were completely ignorant of an entirely different reality from what they're used to. Anyway, I used to take this bus service where I live called Link, which provided transportation for people with disabilities. I've had my fair share of issues with them, but those stories are for another time. Anyway, I was waiting inside the humanities building at my community college. I had a lot of time to wait for the bus to come. It was around 4 p.m., and I usually liked to hang out in that building whenever I didn't have anything else to do. I was just on my phone, checking my social media. I'm minding my own business, when a woman comes into the building, speaking Spanish in a loud voice. I didn't pay her much attention at first. I figured, of course, that she was talking to someone else. After all, I wasn't the only one in the building, and she could have easily been talking on the phone. There's also the little fact that I don't even speak Spanish. I mean, I know the basic words that everyone knows, but that's about it. The woman edged closer to me though, still speaking Spanish. The edginess of her voice immediately caught my attention. She had a sharp, no-nonsense tone, which scared me a little. That's when I realized she was talking to me. I told the woman I couldn't understand her, but obviously she didn't speak English at all. I felt a little bit helpless, but I didn't want to just ignore the woman. As much as the situation unsettled me, I wasn't the type to just ignore someone. Another student came down the hall at that moment and asked if I needed help, which I did. I asked her if she spoke Spanish and explained the situation to her, and she spoke to the lady for me. The student who spoke English told me that the lady had said that my bus had arrived to pick me up. I told her to tell the woman that my bus surely wasn't coming yet. The time frame was between 5 and 5:30. She explained this to the woman, who again insisted that it was my bus. The entire situation was starting to get on my nerves. I've dealt with so many people who have made me feel unsettled, but I felt a sense of dread during this situation, like there was a real danger. That's when I did something I regretted later on. I walked outside. Thankfully, though, I was smart enough to stay within sight and not walk all the way out to where the bus was. I was still close by the building. Let me pause for a second to explain something. I wasn't the only disabled student at my school, let alone the only one who took the bus, so the situation was incredibly suspicious to me. For some reason, I could just sense something in the air, and I felt immediately creeped out as I stood there on the path. My senses were on high alert. After minutes of this feeling, I finally had enough. I called dispatch for the bus to ask if my bus had somehow shown up an hour early, which had been known to happen every once in a blue moon. The dispatcher told me my bus wasn't supposed to arrive anytime soon, that another one was picking up someone else. Relieved, I hung up, went back inside, and told the student to explain to the woman that the bus was there to pick up another student, not me. The lady stubbornly persisted it was for me, though. I decided to extricate myself from the situation, thanked the other student for help, and headed off to the bathroom. What was the woman's motive? What was the feeling I had? What would have happened if I had gone closer to the parking lot? That woman was just so persistent. Maybe she meant well and was really trying to help me. Maybe she'd seen me before. But that didn't explain the creepy feeling I got from her, not to mention that weird atmosphere I had when I walked outside. I had never ever seen her before that day, so naturally this situation scared me. I was somewhat familiar with the usual college students that hung around the area at that particular time, smoking and talking to one another. Even though I made the mistake of going outside and calling the dispatch, and not calling them from where I was sitting, I'm lucky that nothing happened to me. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. As always, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any criticisms on how I can make the videos better, or any thoughts about it in general, please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. As well, in the description below the video, there will be links to all of my social media, including my Facebook, Gmail, Twitter, and Twitch accounts. If you guys want to chat, please be sure to send me a message on any of those. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Please be forewarned, though, that I tend to go on Facebook less than the others, so it may take me a little bit longer to respond to you. If you want to send in a story, or you have a story that you'd like to be read, please be sure to take a look at the description and send me a message on any one of those sites. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include the name of the story if it has one, the theme of the story if it has one as well, and how you would like to be credited in the video the story appears in, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. And please be sure to include as much detail as you are comfortable with, and make sure to follow proper grammar at least a little bit. That way it will be easier for me to read, and it will also be long enough to put into a video. If you guys are curious about the music used in the video, it's always listed in the description in the order which it appears, and I have links to the artists as well. I usually use Doblato Studios and Miyuji, so that's usually what you're going to find there. If you're curious about the art in the video, my art guy Alan always does all of my art for the channel. He's a very good friend of mine, and I have links to all of his social media as well, so if you like his stuff, be sure to check him out. He does commissions as well, I'm pretty sure, so if you like it, you can definitely get some good quality products from him. I don't think there's too much new updates today, other than the fact that I'm very excited for the PlayStation 5 coming out, and I just ordered Pikmin 3 on the Switch, so hopefully that gets here soon. I've been waiting like 3 years for that because nobody bought a Wii U. So, yeah, that's my news for now. Be sure to let me know how you guys are doing as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Portis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we're going to be having another batch of spooky stories for your listening pleasure. So I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I used to work as a veterinary technician in an animal hospital that was generally accepted to be haunted. I mean, things would fall off the shelves out of nowhere. Strange, shadowy figures would be seen walking in the halls out of the corner of eyes. The works. Well, one night I'm trying to get all the work done, and I'm feeling a little resentful because everyone else had left for the day without completing all the tasks. I'm close friends with the woman who will be opening the next morning, and damned if I'm gonna let her handle all the work by herself. We have a single hallway in the back. At either end is a door. Along one side are 4 doors that each lead into a ward. D ward was where we had the laundry machines, which were right inside the door in a short concrete hallway that led into the ward proper. Most of the rooms were around the corner, and at this time of day, we have most of the lights switched off throughout the hospital. One last load of laundry was all that remained between me and freedom, and I was ecstatic to pop the dryer open and fold it all. As I leaped into D ward, I got to work immediately. No sooner do I start folding the towels, do I hear the sound of slowly shuffling feet coming from around the corner in the unlit room. My muscles tighten. But if that's all that's happening, then I could finish the laundry and just go out without looking. For some reason, even though the light switch was within flickering distance, I had the dreaded feeling that reaching for it would somehow make things worse. Unfortunately for me, the closer I got to finishing the pile of towels, the faster the shuffling got. It sounded like worn leather shoes sliding along the concrete floor, more and more quickly, until the speed became utterly inhuman. Every hair was standing on the back of my neck as I threw the last towel into the pile and didn't even bother putting it away in the cabinets. I bolted out, set the locks, and fled from the hospital. The next day I tried testing a few things out in Ward D, but I could never quite replicate that sound that I heard. When I was a kid, we lived in a rented house which was on the 3rd floor, and it was the topmost floor. Our home was built on the terrace itself. At night I heard the typical anklet sound almost every night, but as I was a kid no one believed me. Days passed, and one night my father rose from bed and asked me if we heard any sounds. I screamed that I did, and all of us went to the terrace to see if anyone was there. What came as a shock was all the families who were living in that building were on the terrace, and they were all wondering about the sound and where it was coming from. The sound that we'd all heard was no longer there. But once everyone had turned off the lights and returned to bed, did I hear it about an inch from my ear, as did my parents. We were very freaked out, but the sounds ceased a few days later. We moved into a new city after that, bought our own house, and that strange sound followed me to my personal room. But after a few days, it faded completely. Me and my sister had adjacent rooms. My room was quite a bit bigger than hers, and sometimes felt empty. Every sound echoed. My sister left home for her job in a different city. I took her room as it was the perfect size, with the perfect furniture for my studies. In a few months, some strange things started happening. I was, and still am, a TV show fanatic, and used to watch comedy shows regularly till morning on my laptop. My room was on the first floor, and my parents' room was on the ground floor. Soon after the anklet episode, I once heard a very loud thud that came from the terrace. I suspected thieves, so I went to get my baseball bat and sprinted towards the terrace at 3 a.m. It sounded like something jumped and fell hard on the ground. I found no one on the terrace, and it happened every other night. I started ignoring it after a while. Now, as the ghost was losing the game, I was no longer scared. So the ghost decided to play a new trick. Imagine this. Do this now. Press a switch on your electricity switchboard. If you hear the sound, you'll hear a loud tick. The on and off switch, constantly. Imagine 20 switches doing the same thing. How loud it will be in eerie silence. Every night this happened, as I slept in my sister's room. I heard it happening in my room, and every time I went to check, I saw the fan moving and slowly stopped as I entered the room. I always, no matter what, always shut the washroom door closed, and every morning I'd see it open after an hour of me shutting the door closed at 2:30 a.m. Now I got comfortable with this. These things stopped happening, but the craziest part is yet to come. I started seeing numbers in triples. Sometimes we don't turn our gaze to the clock or unlock our phone just for the sake of it. The numbers started to appear together. I saw numbers in triples like 222, 333 and the like. It was driving me mad. The car in front, YouTube views, news, triples all over the place. People pass arguments that my mind wanted to see triples, and that's why I always got fixated on them. Maybe it was my subconscious, maybe it wasn't. But the story had just begun. Every day and every night, I'd wake up at 2:22 or perhaps 3:33 for 6 months. Sometimes I'd check my phone to see what time it was, and it would go from 3:32 to 3:33. Craziest part? I once woke up on the 3rd of March at 3:33 a.m. with my phone battery at 33%. I wish I'd have taken a screenshot. I looked it up. What was happening with me? I remember one more instance. The most dreadful incident of my life. Do you know the faces you see in your dreams? Or the faces you draw in your mind are not your own creation? You've actually seen those faces before, and your brain keeps repeating them. Now I was leaving for school, and I had a really scary dream. I mean, even now I get shivers when I think of it. There was a man in my dream, of medium height, bald, wearing old clothes with dark circles, like a Vantablack. Next day I was getting my bike out of my house to go to school. The same man who I saw in my dreams was standing in the middle of the road staring at me. He did this for 2 to 3 minutes, and I was petrified, unable to move an inch and unable to scream. Then the man didn't move either. He stared at me for the longest 2 minutes of my life, and just turned and walked away. I had a very high fever that day and didn't go to school. Fast forward a few years. I had this feeling for a year now and still have it, that whenever I sleep I feel someone standing near me, over me, and directly looking at me. Even when I'm alone or with a bunch of friends, I always feel the presence of someone I do not know. I moved out of my hometown for my job in the same city my sister moved into. This happened a year ago. I lied on my bed, closed my eyes, wasn't even sleeping, and felt someone yank my hand. I thought I was dreaming, but 2 minutes later someone tightly slapped me on my left cheek, and no one was in the house. I was raised in a 3-room mobile home, and me and my brother shared the master bedroom, because my mum would rent out one room since my dad was no longer with us. My little brother and sister would sleep in the same room with my mum and my mother's boyfriend, since the room that they stayed in was the same size as the master bedroom, except it didn't have a restroom in the room. While growing up, I've always had an open mind for the supernatural world, so sometimes I would see or hear things, and I wouldn't know if what I saw or heard on my own was actually the supernatural, or just my mind playing tricks on me. But everything happened in my room. Sometimes I would ask my brother and my mum if they saw or heard the same thing. My mum would say that she didn't, and that my mind was playing tricks on me, and to not tell my sister or brother because she didn't want me to scare them. On the other hand, my brother would say I were crazy, as he did not believe in the supernatural. But that all changed once they had their own experiences with the paranormal. My mum's experience happened when she was pregnant with my little brother, and I was in junior year of high school. Once I got home from school, my mum was sitting outside waiting for me, and I asked her, "Why are you waiting outside?" She tells me that she got scared inside the house and decided to wait for me out here. My mum tells me that she was home alone cooking, and it was quiet, when out of nowhere she hears a loud bang coming from my room, as if someone dropped my air conditioning. Her first thought was that someone was trying to rob the house, so she grabs the knife and turns off everything, so that they think no one's home, and she waits at the end of the hallway in case they come out. As she waits, she hears noises and footsteps coming from my mum's room, to the point where she hears more than one person. She hears them throwing papers around and knocking down objects, and she starts to get scared, but she tries to stay calm after waiting for 10 minutes. And it gets quiet, and after 5 minutes of pure silence, she gets the courage to open my door, and she hears and sees nothing, just the way I had left my room before I left school. While realizing nothing happened in my room, she realizes that someone tall is standing behind her, and her body is overtaken by sadness and fear, so she starts to break down. She gains the courage to look behind her, and sees that no one's there, and she decides to go outside as fast as she can to wait for me. Nowadays, after I moved out, she tells me that she sometimes hears my voice calling her from a distance while I'm at work, and at night, she sees either an adult sitting on the couch looking at her, or a little kid sitting on the flower throw when no one's there. My brother's experience happened when he was 20, and I was 19, and my other brother had come down from college to visit. It was 11 p.m. while I was at my friend's house. Once I get home, he asked me if I had came home and tell him no, that I was at my friend's house with a group of friends sitting down and chatting, and I ask him what happened. He tells me, "You know, you tell us you heard and saw something and we think you're dumb and going crazy?" He begins to tell me his story, that he was in the restroom doing the number 2, and after a while in the restroom he hears footsteps through the wall, thinking it's me because he heard the door open and then close. He begins to call out my name, hoping that I respond, but it's quiet. But he hears someone inside the room sitting down on the chair rocking back and forth and keeps calling out to me. He begins to hear someone grabbing at his college homework and throwing it around and ripping it up. So he starts to call me out. He gets angry because he just finished cleaning and says he hadn't heard someone's voice. He hurried up out of the restroom only to see the room was perfectly clean and no one was in there. He goes to the kitchen and asked if anyone had went into the room. My mum answered that no one had ever gone over there or near the door. He explains to her what he heard, and ever since then has also believed in the supernatural. While I was growing up, I always heard and saw things, so I've always been a believer, but it never bothered me, and I was never scared of the paranormal. I was 20 years old when I had astro projected the first time that I remember. Me and my girlfriend had 2 pit bulls that lived at my mum's house at the time, and my brother was in college. My girlfriend's shift was from 6:45 a.m. to 3:15. In my case, my schedule was all over the place, so my sleep schedule was messed up. But one of my shifts I worked at night, so I would arrive home at around 6:30 a.m. When I get home, I usually let my mum know I'm going to bed, so she doesn't begin to worry about where I am. As I'm getting ready to sleep, I face the edge, because if I face the wall, I feel someone's presence standing behind me, especially sitting down on my chair. I was asleep. I rolled over, and it turned out to be that my spiritual self had rolled over instead of my physical body. I rolled over and was able to see myself asleep, and the moment my girlfriend walks in and says, "Oh, you're awake," and I ask her, "You're home early? Your manager let you off early?" "Yes," she replies. I look at the time. It's 12 p.m. They would have never let you off this early. She just stares at me and begins to smile, a smile from ear to ear, and begins to transform to her normal self. A long-fingered, long-haired, ugly-looking creature, pimples all over her face. She looked a bit like the witch from the movie Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. She stared at me and smiled, but I wasn't afraid. And then out of nowhere, in the blink of an eye, she was face to face with me, grabbed my arm with her long nails going through my skin, and I began to yell out in pain as she just laughed at me. At that exact moment, the dog heard me, or her, laugh and began to bark loudly. And I woke up. The moment I awoke, I was face to face with the wall instead of the edge of the bed, but then felt this presence behind me. And I knew it was because I saw her face to face, and my dog kept barking. Once the dog stopped, I assumed it scared her off, and I took a look at my arm where she had grabbed me, and saw the marks left by her nails. I told my mum what happened, and she believed me ever since her own encounter. Ever since that day, I now sometimes see people, or hear noises even though no one is around me. I used to rarely have dreams about the future, and nowadays I've been having dreams about some of my family members dying or committing suicide, or me being at their funeral, which I hope none of them come true. Usually my dreams about the future tend to end in reality. I've told my story to people, and they begin to talk to me about a third eye or my sixth sense, but now I'm starting to think that when the demon grabbed my arm, I think she helped me unlock something. Because wherever I go, I feel a presence around, like someone is staring at me from a distance. Or sometimes I'm able to see it from the corner of my eye. When I look, no one's there. People call me crazy, but they can call me whatever they want. They just need to experience it firsthand in order to truly understand and become a believer themselves. My grandfather was a truck driver and taught me everything I know about driving, especially in snow. I used to work at a drugstore, and one night I was closing another store in our chain, and we had a snow squall that unexpectedly dropped a few inches of snow in our area. I wasn't very familiar with the area, and I had my mum's car, so I wasn't used to that either. The snow was still coming down, and I couldn't see. So I was creeping home and panicking as I saw cars spinning out all around me. All of a sudden, I saw a light in my passenger side view mirror, and I turned my head, and sitting in the passenger seat plain as day, I saw my dead grandfather. I heard him say he knew that I was freaked out by the snow, and then I heard his voice rattling off all the things he taught me about driving in the snow. I looked back towards the road, and he was gone. It was a calming experience when I saw him, and it was more, "Okay, Pop's here, I'm okay," instead of, "Oh my god, you're supposed to be dead," and I stopped panicking and got home without a problem. It was most likely just my brain or eyes or whatever playing tricks on me to get me to stop panicking, but to this day, it still freaks me out. So in Mexico, some homes have their hallways open to the front/backyard, a mostly old design now. Back when I was around 8 years old, I went to Mexico to visit my grandparents for the summer. It's a ranch house, and they have horses, cows, and turkeys. Every time I go, I sleep in this one room that's separated from the main house. Imagine a courtyard, my room on the east side of it, and the main house on the west. And running from north to south in the middle is my grandmother's garden, fenced off so that the chickens won't come in and destroy it. The entrance to the inside of the house is on the west side of the courtyard through the main house. It had a heavy wooden double door, and one night before we went to sleep, we usually pray, and that night, my cousin did not want to teach me about a certain prayer, so I got upset and wished him bad things. At 3 a.m. we wake up to the sound of a horse walking on cement. I look out the window that's facing the courtyard and it's dark. For a second, I thought the horse got out of the corral, but the dogs would have been barking. The noise of the hoofs stomping on the cement got closer, and all of a sudden we see 2 red dots moving while the horse is walking, and we jump under the covers and start praying. The next morning, I asked my grandparents if they had heard the horse walking sounds. They said no and asked why, with an "oh shit" look on their face. I told them that we heard a sound as if a horse were walking inside the house in the courtyard. "Ah, the legend," they reply. According to her and the town, there is a trail in the mountains just a few hundred feet from where my grandpa's home is that is not very traveled because, as they call it, it's the Devil's Trail. He roams about on it with his horse occasionally. So yeah, I'll never forget that. The legend might be false, but the sound of the horse walking inside the house and seeing red lights move in the dark is real, as 3 of us witnessed it. When I was a young child, me and my family moved around a lot, as a parent was a Coast Guard. We always drove, so we stayed in a lot of hotels. Practically every time I stayed in a hotel after my family had fallen asleep, I would see a creature moving back and forth between the walls and the ceiling. The creature looked like a spider monkey, with its tail curled around its body. It moved back and forth, not smoothly, but in small jolts, almost like you would see using a flipbook. I was a bit intimidated by it, but was never stricken with fear. I saw it from as young as I can remember until age 10, and after that it just stopped. A rational adult mind tells me that my imagination as a child ran away with me. I tell myself that I expected to see the creature, and that's why I did so often. But in the back of my mind, I cannot deny that I know full well what I saw. This was a long time ago. I was 1 or 2 and my brother was 5 or 6. My mum was in the bath with the boiler in a cupboard behind her head. Suddenly, she began to hear this creepy demonic giggling and a whisper coming from the cupboard. She called for my brother, then my dad, thinking they were playing a trick on her, but there was no reply. She spoke to my dad after her bath, explaining what happened, and he just brushed it off and laughed at her. Then a few weeks later, my dad anxiously questioned my mum on what she'd heard. Turns out he heard the exact same thing she had, coming from the cupboard. This is a very sentimental story for me, and I've finally decided to share it. I don't recall the date that we moved into this lovely little house in the more suburban area of Baton Rouge. From the best I can remember, we were still unpacking a few weeks later when the haunting began, or at the very least started for myself and my siblings. I was alone at the time, in my room, not in the house, playing with my toys, when I felt a presence in the room with me. I looked up and scanned the room, finally resting my eyes on a girl standing in my doorway holding a cat. Even after all these years, I can still remember what she looked like, barefoot and wearing a yellow sundress. She smiled at me, with her turquoise eyes seeming to sparkle with cheer. Now I wasn't afraid. There was nothing to be afraid of. Certainly she was only a neighborhood girl who'd come over to visit. After all, my parents would never let just anyone into our home. And she looked sweet, completely trustworthy, more so than anyone else I've ever met. So I addressed her as I would any other visitor. Hello? What's your name? She smiled again and said, My name is Precious. What's yours? David, I replied, taken in by her French Cajun accent. This was the first time I'd ever heard one, despite living very close to Cajun Island, and it made her seem even sweeter, like a truly noble lady. She walked over and set her cat on the floor, just at the edge of all the Legos I had all around my room. Now that I finally had a good look at her, I realized she was a bit too old not to be in school, so I asked her about it. Oh, I'm homeschooled, she replied. That must be nice, I said in turn. With an even larger and happier smile than before, she reached out and rubbed my head with her palm. Oh, it's very nice. She looked at the mess of Lego in my hand. What are you making there? A spaceship, I replied enthusiastically. It didn't look remotely like any kind of ship. Could you show me how to make one? She asked. Sure. And I showed her how the blocks worked, eventually ending up with 2 spaceships. And after she saw what I had done, she went about playing with the Legos too. After a while, I felt a paw touch my arm and glanced down to see her cat staring up at me. He was so beautiful. So I reached down to stroke his fur, feeling a softness I'd never experienced before or since. Is this your cat? I don't think we have one. Of course. I like having him nearby. He's my friend. Can he be my friend? Of course he can. He certainly seems to like you. I'll stop the story here. As you can see, she was quite normal, indistinguishable from any normal kid in every way. But the haunting didn't end with nearly daily visits from my friend. Soon, we started noticing paranormal activity around the house. It was always mild, non-threatening stuff, like things moving around or whispers. There was one thing that happened from time to time though, and that was her and her cat running off bad people. Whenever someone came in who was scummy in any way, lights would flicker, or they, the visitor, would see a cat staring at them. its face scrunched up and hissing, like it was getting ready to rip their face off. We didn't have a cat at the time, and our electricity was faulty. We quickly learnt that these things only happened when questionable folk were in the house, and from what I was told a decade later, those people often ended up in trouble later on down the line. After living there for just over 2 years, we had to move to a new place, as my father found new work in a town several hours' drive to the north. I actually remember saying goodbye to Precious, and we both teared up. It was heartbreaking to leave my closest friend behind. I remember taking one last look back at the house as we drove away, and seeing her standing on the porch waving at me, clearly crying. Even over 30 years later, I can't get that face out of my memory. She was sad. So sad. And so was I. It left me a little depressed for a few months after, which my parents just chalked up to moving day blues. But we all knew the real reason. But over time, I stopped thinking about it, and finally moved away from that day emotionally. It would be over 10 years later before I really put much thought into her, not because I no longer cared, but because the memory still hurt all those years later, all the way up to today. In a casual conversation with my mother one day, while my siblings were at school, as I was skipping classes to help pack up for yet another move, the benefits of being a smart child. And I brought her up. I remember my mum smiling, and she explained that Precious was a spirit. I'll never call her a ghost, due to the way that people feel about ghosts. She was not to be feared, but loved. Needless to say that after hearing this, I cried. Now, not only did I realize that I had abandoned a very good friend, but I had abandoned a friend who would never be able to seek out new friends and would have to deal with whomever moved into that house. I felt wrong for a few days, but eventually decided I'd do what I could to go back. It's been far too long, and life has kept me too busy to even entertain the idea of searching out that old house. Right now, I'm busy getting ready to move into a new place, and I've already started working on figuring out how to go back. It'll take some time to save up the money and track down the exact house, let alone get the owners to let some random man into their home. Now, well, I just hope she remembers me and will come back when I visit. I would even like to try and get her to come home with me, so that I could introduce her to my kids and give her a nicer place to stay. But right now I have a mortgage, so even my greatest, closest friend will have to wait until the day that I am available. Believe it or not, that day came closer than I expected, and I made the trip down there to see what I could see. I brought with me a cheap audio recorder and my phone, but unfortunately didn't get much use on either of them. In my excitement, I forgot all about my phone. I understand that without evidence, all of this means nothing, but I felt that I should share what I experienced. The house was a mess when I got there. Most of that particular suburb had become a bit of a slum. Druggies had been using the abandoned homes as a place to squat. Luckily, my house was relatively untouched due to the spirit inside, I suppose. I felt bad that Precious's home was being used that way, but I soldiered on and entered the house, finding that it was indeed a mess, but that the mess was also pushed to the side with clear walkways. I found my way to my old bedroom, and to my surprise it was almost clean. And that's when I felt it. You know the feeling you get when an old friend you haven't seen in a while calls you out the blue, and you get that excited feeling. Well, that was me. I spun around and didn't see anything, so I called out to her. "Precious, are you there?" I felt more than I heard her answer. "I'm here, David." I dropped my recorder as I fumbled around trying to get it to turn on. I was so excited to finally see her again, and when I finally got the recorder off the floor, I hit the record button and held it out. "Precious, if you talk into this thing, I can record you." "I don't want to be recorded. I just wanted to say goodbye." This threw me for a loop. Goodbye? Why goodbye? I can't put words to the feeling that rolled over me. There was so much wrong about them. Sorrow, fear, abuse. I asked her if anyone had tried to hurt her. She said no. She had been so lonely. I would later find out that after a bit of research, the only family that lived there after my own were a pair of elderlies, and Precious never really spoke to adults, and I was pretty surprised to hear her speak to me. "Please," asked a voice in my head, "please don't leave me again." My heart stopped for a second. She sounded so sad, so hurt, but I couldn't stay. I even told her as much. I told her that I had a kid and she'd be welcome to follow me home. Hearing her say goodbye, then follow it up with, "Don't leave me," made me want to take her away so that she'd never be alone again. She was so lonely that anyone with a heart would feel for her. She told me that she couldn't. She could only be in that house or in heaven, nowhere else. So I swallowed my greed and told her to go to heaven. She didn't need to live in a drug den. She deserved so much more. Suddenly I felt pressure around my waist. She was hugging me, and I started to cry. I told her how much I missed her, and she returned those words, and then I told her to move on for a second time. She asked if I could stay. She wanted so much to have a friend again. 30 years alone had taken its toll on her. I explained to her that I couldn't. I had to be at work the following day and take care of my child. She released me and stepped back. For one fleeting second I saw her again, still dressed in one of her cute little summer dresses, still smiling at me, even though her eyes were sad. "You'll never see me again," she said. "I just want you to be happy. I'm getting old. I doubt I have much time left on this earth myself. You see, I have a few medical conditions that are going to kill me sooner rather than later, but this isn't the time nor place." She started to cry, and I was instantly reminded of the last time we'd seen each other. I wanted so badly to be able to hug her again and try to comfort her, but all I could do was tell her to move on, and I made it clear that people knew about her, that people knew she was a good girl, and that seemed to make her happy. I felt her walk away. Then I heard her voice, "Goodbye, David." Then there was nothing. Absolute silence. I spent about an hour crouched on the floor, bawling my eyes out. I'd abandoned my friend, and she had waited so faithfully for me to return. And now, she was gone. It hurt more than our first goodbye. It hurt more than every other loss I had in my entire life. After I was done crying, I looked down at my recorder. It was running, but the low power light was blinking. I remember praying to have captured something, and my later disappointment that the recorder only recorded my words and some indistinct static, which was almost as bad as having Precious leave me forever. I wanted to at least have her last words to carry with me. I want to add that I'm glad she's finally moved on. It's been over 30 years since I left her for the first time, and now, well, she's free of the house. I'd like to think she's happy. I'd like to think heaven is as good as her people say. I'll just have to wait for my turn to find out. Anyway, That's the sad end to what I've prayed would be a happy story. I wish so much that I could have helped her more. I wanted so much for her to be happy. But it's clear to me now that there was no place for her on this earth anymore. It still hurts, and it will for some years to come. Important things to know. When I go out into my tiny backyard, I can see directly over to a home care center. There is also a forest near me, with a main courtyard that is said to be haunted by 3 ghosts. It's actually really pretty, and have stood there since. I live up north in Denmark, but the building I live in is from 1958, so it isn't that old. There once was a cellar, but it's covered now. We've had the place cleansed twice and it's helped, but I'm sure that the thing is back. Anyway, the night of the 6th of August 2017, me and my then 22-year-old sister, I myself was 15 at the time, were home alone. When we got tired, we went to bed. My mum said we could sleep in her bedroom. My sister fell asleep before me, as I have trouble sleeping, and it doesn't help that I'm a paranoid person. Well, I just laid with my phone when I heard the sound of glass set on the table. My mum always drinks Pepsi Max, so I assumed it was her. Our table was made of marble, so it's also quite a loud sound. Not long after I heard that, the sound of our toilet door locked. I messaged my mum and asked her if she came home earlier than she planned. She said no, and asked why. "Oh, I just thought I heard you," I responded. "You see, we have 2 floors. Me and my sister were occupying the top floor, and not more than 10 minutes after, I heard the sound of small children's feet running through the corridor. But I didn't hear anyone go up the stairs. It needs to be said that our stairs squeak a lot, so I would have heard. For a long time, I didn't experience anything. But when I got a boyfriend, it all started up again. But only when he was at my place, every weekend, except the few times we were at his. While I slept, he took my computer and looked through my pictures, but he found something that made him upset. In the evening, he confronted me. I, of course, told him the truth, that I had been in love with him a year before we got together. He had been someone I really wanted to get with, not only for his looks, but for his personality. And he was okay again. He needed to use the loo. So I laid in bed, phone in hand, when I felt something sharp scratching the back of my hand. I immediately felt goosebumps run down my spine, and I knew that when I moved my hand there would be nothing. While that happened in my room, he sat on the toilet, cutting himself, as he had hard depression and is now on pills. So when he came up and sat on my bed, he took a bloody toilet paper out of his pocket. I'm not stupid and confronted him, because he was obviously not okay. I don't remember after that, but I think we made up. Another day and my boyfriend and I were in bed. He apparently looked at me and he asked, "Did you scratch your bum?" "No," I asked. "Why?" "You see, you've got a massive scratch mark." I couldn't find a reason, so I told him everything that had happened. He himself didn't believe in ghosts, but he said he gets extremely depressed when at my place, and he also felt a very weird feeling. I told my mum everything that happened, and after she didn't want me sleeping up there alone, so she made me sleep in the living room with her. After many days of sleeping in the living room, I wanted to sleep upstairs. Once again, I heard the bare feet, but said screw it and tried to sleep. When I fell asleep, There didn't go long until something happened. What sounded like a big man's hands banging on the door. I jumped up and I wanted to go downstairs, but I was so scared. Finally, I got my stuff together and ran downstairs. I had a period where I had nightmares every night. Most of the night, I dreamed that I got attacked by a small animal, like rabbits or dachshunds. I'd never been scared of animals, but then I would wake up all sweaty, and it hurt from my toes to the top of my spine. I remember a story my mum told me once. Before I was born, my mum, sister, and my dad lived in an apartment. My dad was out that night, so it was only my mum and sister. They were sitting on the couch watching TV. My mum thought she saw some man with a big hat. She thought it kind of resembled Hans Christian Andersen, the famous children book author. My mum is one of those people who explains things away, but when my sister said, "Mum, who was that?" she realized that she couldn't deny it and got shivers up her spine. One time my sister was home alone, so she invited her best friend over. They were sitting with her computer just playing around recording for fun, when they heard a woman scream, and it couldn't be outside. My sister said it came from the bathroom. They were scared, so they ran to my sister's room, and I don't know when this happened, but when they came back, a picture of my sister was on the floor and the glass was broken. My sister walked over to the computer, and they got it all on video. When she wanted to show my mum the screen was broken, we had 3 computers unexplainably break. I remember one time when I was sitting on my couch. My mum always sits between our couch and table, so I was sitting/laying behind my mum on my phone, when I heard a low crawl in front of me. I looked up and saw a shadow. It was light grey. As soon as I looked up, they disappeared. I was shocked. The apartment I was talking about, where my mum and sister and dad lived before I was born. In this place, there was some creepy stuff happening too. There was once a postman who was an alcoholic, who decided to end his life by hanging himself in my sister's room. When she was around 4 or 5 years old, almost every night, the postman would come to her room and speak with her. She wasn't scared, but she was scared when she saw snakes under her bed. One of my friends was watching over my dog, and when I got home, he told me that a male voice was talking upstairs. I asked if it could be the neighbor, but he told me the dogs reached, so it couldn't have been the neighbors. I don't remember everything, but it's certainly been a strange collection of paranormal events happening to me and my family for a long time. In high school, I was finally on a first date with a hot friend of mine. We went parking on a remote gravel road, beautiful summer night, full moon shining all over the tall corn. We were making out in the front bucket seats of my stick shift car, and I saw some shadows dancing across the front. She looked up from kissing and then looked out her window, and started this blood-curdling scream. I looked up in time to see something duck down from the window. She then yelled, "There's a man out there!" I told her to roll up her window, and in one quick motion I started the car, shoved it in first and dumped the clutch. We were so hyped that the car just sat and spun out in the gravel through second gear. We finally calmed down enough to drive back to town. I knew the parking was done for the evening, and after taking my extremely distraughted friend home, I caught up with a carload of my buddies. After relating the story, we were all ready to go back and kick the dirty bushwhacker's ass. However, all we could see in the vicinity was the farmer's large German shepherd sniffing around in the ditch. I was thinking, no way. Sure as hell, the next morning, I was looking over my car, and you guessed it, large paw prints on the passenger door. I bet she scared that poor dog as much as he scared her. We laughed our asses off to this day. Guess it wasn't a ghost after all. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. As always, a huge thank you to my incredible patrons for their generosity in keeping the channel going. It really does mean a lot. And if you'd like your name on screen, feel free to check out the link to Patreon, where by donating as very little as $1 a month, you can help keep things running over here and receive some cool prizes for doing so. Thanks guys. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If of course you did, don't forget to do all the normal stuff, letting me know, la. But yes, it's been a good day. I hope you like these stories. I'm probably going to have more paranormal stories, paranormal themed stories these next few days for Paranormal Week. Just so you know, Paranormal Week is usually 5 instead of 7 days. It just depends on the stories I've got archived. I'm pretty sure I've got a few more funky topics. And for